So we're going to do a little bit about alchemy tonight. So alchemy in the kitchen. So really, what is alchemy? It's the basis of actual modern science and philosophy. It's something that, strangely enough, came together across a multiple of cultures, very close in timelines. So everywhere from Asia through Egypt and through ancient Greece, this philosophy of alchemy took place, and it was a way for ancient people to what we call science, which at the time would have looked a lot like magic, things happening, and tying it in with also with philosophical and religious values. So I always find it interesting that a lot of these ideas cascade through different cultures right about the same time. It's almost that divine spark type of thing. And you see that a lot repeated throughout history. It's like, good ideas just can't be kept down. And this is one that has held on and has lasted all the way through, even till now. People actually practice different types of alchemy. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what alchemy is today. This is a Western style of alchemy. It's generally divided into two different levels. One is an exoteric or practical applications, and what we now refer to as science, and esoteric, which is spiritual applications. And even though modern thinking tells us that science and religion don't mix, alchemy tells us that they do. Okay, it's that magical spark behind a lot of things. We love to think of ourselves as so far advanced from our ancestors, but the reality is that they developed a lot of the blueprints that we use today. And when you're thinking about how does this apply, it's like you got to think about the first person that ate an olive. I know this is going to sound a little weird, but the first person that ate an olive had to be pretty desperate, because olives, frankly, off the tree, they're not good. It's not something you really want to eat. They're very bitter. They're mealy and mushy, and they've got this large pit, and there's almost no value to it at all. So you had to be pretty desperate. Olives today, I mean, we use olive oils. It's got all these health benefits. It's, olives themselves, there's different types. They have different flavors. But it took how did that happen? How did that first somebody pick that off the tree and went, oh, that's disgusting, I'm not going to eat that, to how did it become something that so many people enjoy today? And it was through a little bit of magic or alchemy at the time. I mean, how did that happen? Did it fall into salt water and sit there long enough that it leached out those bitter oils and those bitter ingredients so that it became something palatable? Because that's, it's called brining, and that's actually a type of fermentation. So was it magic? Was it alchemy? But really, people think of alchemy now as the traditional, or the Western styles. Ooh, we're turning lead into gold. So we're taking something that's a base metal that has very little value, kind of like that olive on the tree has very little value, and turning it into something that is high value, turning it into gold, basically something that everybody wants. So, and we do that with an olive through brining, or believe it or not, the addition of lye, of all things, can make the same process happen. So these exoteric or practical applications happen every single day. Okay, so they're not, what am I looking for? So they're not magical, it's science. But if you're looking at it and you don't understand the science behind it, it is magical. So there is still that spark in it. Okay? So that leads us to what we're going to talk about or do a little bit of tonight. And we're going to talk about fermented foods. Okay, this is how alchemy ties into a kitchen. So people think of fermented foods and they're going, oh, we're talking about mead, we're talking about wine, we're talking about beer. Well, we're talking about cider. We're talking about sauerkraut. We're talking about sourdough bread, pickles, vinegar, natto, yogurt. Milk is actually can be a fermented product. There's different types of fermentation. I mean, kimchi is fantastic, a wonderful thing. Fermented sausages, very good. Just about every single culture, if you do not even a deep dive, just a light dive into it, you're going to find some type of a fermented food. So this is where people are taking something that is plain and ordinary, and they're applying change to it, transformation. Okay. There's 3 different types of fermentation. There's a lactic acid fermentation, and this is where yeast and bacteria convert starches or sugars into lactic acid, okay? It doesn't require heat, so we're not cooking anything. The lactic acid bacteria are vital to producing and preserving inexpensive and wholesome foods, which is especially important in feeding impoverished populations. So these are methods that are used across multiple cultures, and they usually start at home in the kitchen. And how do I make this last? How do I make it go further? And sometimes we end up with spoilage and surprises, and sometimes we end up with these really delicious things that we now cherish. This method makes sauerkraut, it makes pickles, kimchi, it does make yogurt, sourdough bread, which is just a favorite for me. And strangely enough, this is also the same process that makes sore muscles when you overexercise. This same type of process is actually happening in your own body. So this doesn't require any outside help, just it requires the right environment. Okay, so there's ethanol fermentation, and this is alcohol fermentation. This is the one that most people are familiar with. This is the one where yeasts are breaking down the sugars. They're creating either alcohol or carbon dioxide, or actually both when they're breaking it down. Those are the byproducts. And of course, in our culture, we tend to make that, distill it down and make it even stronger, and turn it into hard liquor as well. And then the third type is acetic acid fermentation. And this is the type where we get apple cider vinegar, wine vinegars, kombucha, a lot of these things that, people say are actually really good for you to drink because it's all this active bacteria. It's probiotics, prebiotics, and it's actually helpful. And doctors are recommending now that, strangely enough, we go back to drinking or eating these very basic things that we used to do before we knew they were healthy for us. And now they're rediscovering them. So at the end of the day, what is alchemy and how does this all tie into kitchen witchery and being in the kitchen? So alchemy is about transformation. So it's transforming one thing into another. So we're going to change for a second from the exoteric to the esoteric, okay? And the esoteric, remember, this is the internal and the spiritual and the philosophical part of it. And this is where, to me, the exoteric, so what we do in the kitchen as a kitchen witch, ties into the philosophical and religious part of it. You say, you ever tried to change something about yourself? Okay? Especially right now in this time of COVID, as you might call it. Changing things about yourself. A lot of people have done it. They want to walk more, they want to write more letters, or they want to learn something new, or they want to change a habit. And the question is, were you successful, or did it just kind of fizzle out, or have this really weird transformation that resulted in something different? So, in the exoteric world, that would be like the exploding mead bottles, never a good thing. It might be the sour pickles that went way too sour or got the funny color to them, things like that. So, you tried something new, it didn't really work out, but the question is, did you prepare for it? Did you, in the exoteric world, we're going to find our ingredients. We're going to be careful about our preparation. We're going to follow a recipe. We're going to take it down a specific path. We're going to be patient with it, especially with fermentation, because it takes time. But in the esoteric, we rarely do those things for ourselves. We're never patient with ourselves. We sometimes, start an idea, but we don't fully look into it before we get going and find out it's something that's not really what we thought it was. So we give up, or we change, or it kind of fizzles out, or sometimes it just has a really weird outcome. What we're going to do tonight, we're actually going to go through and make a small sauerkraut recipe. So for me, this is turning lead into gold. You take this raw cabbage that's not much fun, and it is kind of stinky and it's kind of smelly, and doesn't necessarily have a really good reputation, and you turn it into sauerkraut through a grinding fermentation process, and it changes everything about it. So you can't have that really good Reuben without that sauerkraut. It's just not the same. But you got to do it, and it's a great way also to preserve it. This is our fun stuff. All right, so we're going to start with, now yes, this is only a half a head of cabbage. I had to start one so you'd have one to see. And as much as I love sauerkraut, not everybody does. So I wasn't going to make a huge giant batch of it. So I do apologize. But this is where we talk about, you know, when we want to make a change and we only go off half-cocked, do we stop and take a minute to really research what it was we were going to do? Do we know what it is we need to make that change within ourselves? And are we giving ourselves that time and patience? And it kind of works the same way when you're doing a recipe. You know, I had to look it up. I had to read about it. I had to check what the process was, or I would have had to run out. How many times have you like, oh, I'm going to change that paint color on my wall, and you go to Home Depot 6 times because you didn't plan it out. Okay? Same thing with this. So what we're going to do now is I've done the planning. I've got all my ingredients together. I've got my salt. And we're going to talk about salt for a minute on this, because when it comes to doing something with brining, you have to be very careful. You need to do a little bit of research with this, just like when you're changing something about yourself. Do a little bit of research. Using a table salt or a regular kosher salt is not going to work out well for a brining process, because they have anti-flaking ingredients, and they sometimes have other ingredients. It's going to change the color. It's going to make it come out funky looking. It could get cloudy. It's just not going to have the result you want. So the best one to use is actually pickling salt. Pickling salt has no, or canning salt, it's the same thing, has no added ingredients, has no anti-flake ingredients in it. So you don't have to worry about it. Down here in Florida, for some strange reason, it's hard to find, okay? Maybe because we don't do a whole lot of canning down there, but you can find other sea salts that have no additives, but you're going to have to do your research. So you're going to have to prepare, okay? Just like you need to prepare when you want to change something about yourself. So from there, you can add your other ingredients. I like to add a little bit of coriander in there. It's not traditional, but it's got a nice flavor to it. Sometimes onion in there to the fermentation. So you got to decide what it is you're going to do with it, just like you have to make a plan for yourself. Okay. From here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to take the, I'm sure everybody knows you got this nice core in there. We need to take that out. Okay. Make sure we get it all. There we go. And then, and I did this previously, you want to remove all of your large outer leaves, because they're not, they're too fibrous. They tend to be damaged. They tend to so things like this, that's going to give you some bad bacteria. You don't want something like that, so you want to make sure you take it off and just double check it. And then you're actually going to clean it. You're going to rinse it until it runs, the water runs right out of it. And that is a step I did before, just for the sake of time. Okay, so this has already been cleaned. It's already been rinsed. From here, we're going to save. We're going to take a couple more of these larger leaves, and we're going to save them because they got a purpose. Okay. From here, we're going to very thinly, if you have a mandolin or even a grater, you can use that. A food processor is great, especially if you're doing a lot of this. You know, I'm just doing this one little half head, so I'm going to just go through it. You want to cut it nice and thin. Take your time with it. Be patient with it. Okay, so now to make sure we get the right amount of salt, we have to know how much cabbage we're using. Okay, so if you don't have a handy little scale, I recommend one. You're going to use a nice clean glass bowl and throw it in there. So I got about a pound of cabbage. Okay, so to make the right amount of brine on it, we are going to add 2 teaspoons of salt. Okay. So right now, when we're trying to facilitate a transformation, we're taking care, we're taking time, we're being specific about what we want to do. There's things that we don't do enough with ourselves, and we should. So from here, now I've got that salt in there. I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to let it sit. Okay. I'm going to let it sit with that salt. And that is going to pull out a lot of water. So while we're sitting there playing with the salt and letting it pull the water out, we're going to talk a little bit about sanitation for fermentation, because highly important if you don't want to get exploding things or funky things or dangerous things growing. When you're doing this type of a fermentation, everything needs to be clean. So clean in restaurant terms is free of visible debris and dirt. So basically what you run through your dishwasher. When you're doing the alcohol fermentation, everything needs to be sanitized on top of being clean. Sanitation removes all bacteria and viruses. Right? It's very important, the difference. So what we're doing here with using the lactic acid fermentation, we're actually encouraging the natural bacteria that's found in the cabbage. We're encouraging it to grow and change the cabbage. So this is something that we're finding within it. We like it. We want more of it. We want it to work its magic. And to do that, we're creating an environment that it's going to like. Okay. So we don't want to necessarily use pre-bagged cabbage because that's going to be treated. It's going to be washed and treated, antifungals, anti-this, so it lasts longer in the package, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't necessarily want to use those things because you're not going to get the same result. Okay. That's why it's important to, yes, you're going to wash the cabbage, but that's just to remove the outside exterior dirt, and the same reason that we're going to take off those leaves, that the outer leaves and the leaves that are damaged or broken. Okay. So what it's doing here is it's actually, the salt is encouraging the cabbage to release the natural water that's in there. And the longer it sits, the more water that's going to get in there. You're going to start noticing it in the container. And after it sits for a few minutes, what you want to do is you want to start playing with it. You're going to massage it. You're going to massage your cabbage. You're going to work it in, and you're going to help further break down some of those cell walls to release more liquid. Okay. For me, when I'm doing things like this is a really good time to contemplate and think about what it is your end result you want to achieve. So this is almost a meditative type task for getting where you want to go. Yep, smells like cabbage. Okay. So I'm going to rub that in. I'm going to let it sit for a couple minutes. Well, it's going to release some more liquid in there. I don't know if you can see in the bottom, it's starting to get a little juicy down here, which is great. So this is the batch that I started a few days ago. I'm going to try and get it close up to the camera here. So what you see down here on the bottom, hopefully it is visible. You start to see some pockets and some air bubbles and a little bit going on here. And then you have the brine up here on the top. Of course, we have a weight to hold it down to keep it under that brine, because as it bubbles, it's going to rise. Okay, you need to keep it submerged. And the color stays pretty much really nice. And this is the result of using a salt without the additives. If it had the additives, it would be getting cloudy, which we really don't want. So every day, as we're doing this, you got to check on it. You might get some scummy looking stuff, some bubbles that float to the top, and that's okay. It's actually good. You skim it off and you just let it go. And if your brine starts to get low, you can just add a little more. Okay? But in the meantime, we've got our cabbage that has really started to, yeah, it started to melt down now. Really nice. So this is kind of what we're looking for. I don't know if you guys can see that. You can see all that liquid is just running out of here. So it's actually making its own brining liquid. So just keep working with it, pushing it down. And all we did was add some basic elements. So we took our lead, we added a basic earth element, salt, And we're going to transform it with a little time into something else. Okay. Okay, so you see all of this liquid. If you recall, I did not add any liquid to this. So just keep squeezing. So as odd as it sounds, now that we've squeezed it real nice, I'm going to take all this extra liquid I have that's in this bowl. I'm just going to add it right back in. The reason you take it and squeeze is it really just encourages it to release even more of the liquid. And I'm going to push down. Get that down a little bit. So I'm going to push down until it's nice and solid in my container. And when you're doing this, you want to use a container that's, free from scratches. You don't really want to use plastic. You can use a crockery, anything that's easily cleanable. Okay, but remember, scratches and dents and things are going to hold bacteria, and metal will react to this in not necessarily a good way. So I actually have so much liquid in there already that it's up and over the top of my cabbage. Simple as that. Now I'm going to take those nice big leaves that I set aside at first. I'm going to use those like their very own seal. Okay. Just make it to the size you need. And that's my lid right there. That's my lid. Okay. And then we're going to take a weight and put it on the top. Now, to make sure the weight stays sufficient, you're going to actually add some brine to here. You're going to make your own brine, which really is about I believe it's about 2 teaspoons to a quart of water, and set it on the top. That way, if a little bit of it gets in when you're moving things around, it's not going to hurt anything. It's just going to add to it. Okay. And then over time, you're just going to leave this sit on the counter. Just leave it sit on the counter, and every day you're going to look at it, and you're going to. Trust me, it's interesting to sit there. Well, it is for me at least. I'm a little weird that way. But it's interesting to check on it every day and see the progress it's making. So when it comes to ourselves, do we give ourselves that time? I'm going to be patient with my sauerkraut. It's going to take time. It's going to take anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks to get where I want it to get. But am I going to give myself that same amount of time when I'm trying to change something about myself? So these are the things that I work into when I'm in the kitchen, that I work into the foods I'm making. So if you're going to add any other ingredients to this, now would be the time to do it. If you're going to add caraway seeds, which is actually very common, now would be the time to do it. If you're going to do the onion or the coriander or even apple will add a sweet note to it. Now is the time to take care of those things. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to do a little bit of, this is one that we've done before, and it started a little bit of a fun route, which is great because a lot of people did it. But we're going to do a batch of what's called Joe's Ancient Orange Mead. So this is where we're going to talk about the yeast fermentations. Okay, so with the sauerkraut, we're doing something that's internal, and it's changing. We're taking what we find inside of us and changing it, and applying the right environment to it, and helping it to grow, and being patient with it and letting it happen. So with yeast fermentation, we're actually taking something from the outside. We're taking the yeast and we're adding it to the mix. So we're bringing that in and we're letting that work the transformation. So this might be an outside source that we're doing. But this one's really simple. And to be honest, if you've never done it and you've thought about making mead or wine, this is an easy one to do, and it's almost impossible to mess up. Okay, if you drop it on the floor, you messed up. That's about how you can mess this one up. It's not so hard. Things you're going to need. You're going to need 3 pounds of honey, and it doesn't really matter what kind of honey, because you can't mess this up. So get 3 pounds of honey that you like, that you enjoy. Okay, you're going to need an orange. Now, you don't necessarily want to grab any old orange off the stack because you got to pay attention to the skin. The whole thing's going in. You got to pay attention to the skin on it, because if you don't and you get some kind of weird, it's got like soft spots or a growth or something on it, you're going to add that to your mead. Not a good thing. So remember, when we're doing with the yeast fermentations, what we're doing is we're removing all other bacteria from the equation. So you got to make sure that it's clean and sanitized. Now, you can't really do that with a piece of fruit, but I did scrub it down and made sure that it was nice and clean. It's free from defects and everything else. We're going to use some spices. So I got some cinnamon here. I've got some cloves. I've got some allspice. We're going to use raisins. Raisins are fantastic. They add a certain amount of natural yeast, believe it or not, to things. So if you have no other way to start yeast, you can actually start it off of raisins in water, believe it or not. It's a little harder to do, but you can. And then for this one, and you can't do this with any other, can't do this with anything else. It doesn't work. Bread yeast, okay? So bread yeast is back on the shelves. You might as well find a really good use for it and make yourself some mead instead. It's fun. And this one only takes 30 days. It doesn't take forever. So it's a really simple, easy one to do. And we're doing all this stuff wrong. We're putting in the whole orange. We're putting in raisins. We're putting in bread yeast, things you're not supposed to do with making mead. But it works, and it's fantastic. If I knew who Joe was, I'd send him a letter and tell him thank you. So the only other thing we got to talk about is the water. Don't use your tap water unless you have a really good filter, because it's going to have a lot of other things in it, a lot of other chemicals in it that can lead to some off flavors, especially down here in Florida. We're adding chlorine and all this other stuff to kill bacteria. So you want to find yourself a nice bottled water or have a really good filter. So this one's pretty easy. So you're going to warm up. You're not going to make the water hot. You just got to warm it up a little bit, okay? So I just had this on low on the stove. And the reason we got to warm the water is because honey does not like to dissolve. Honey wants to stay as honey. It doesn't want to mix with anything else. So we have to encourage it by warming it up and loosening the sugars, okay? So 3 pounds. And we're only making a gallon here. Now, I know some folks will say you need 5 pounds of honey to make a sweet mead. You don't with this recipe, because the yeast that we're going to use won't be able to eat all the sugars in this. It won't go dry. It'll stay nice and sweet. Okay. Oh, and don't worry, I won't let that little bit left in the jar go to waste either. Okay. So, super simple. Find yourself a glass gallon jug. Go buy a gallon of apple juice and drink it. And then you have a glass jug to make your mead in. Simple as that. And the apple juice is good anyway. And when you get really freaky about it, you can use the apple juice to make a bigger batch of mead. And then you end up with hard cider, and you can go all sorts of places from there. You can even make your own vinegar that way, as a matter of fact. So now that we've got this honey dissolved, we're going to pour it into the gallon jug. Okay. Now, I had already added a little bit of water in here, just because I know I'm putting something warm into a glass jug. I don't want anything to happen to the jug. Okay. Want to get all the honey goodness in there. Okay. All the good stuff. All right, so now we're going to take, for this, we're going to take cloves, okay? So cloves, they're very strong, got a great flavor. Throw those in there. I'm going to take some allspice. It doesn't take much. This is only a gallon. You know, I'm using 6 cloves and 6 whole allspice. I really like clove. If you don't, use less or don't use it. It's up to you. I have cinnamon sticks. Okay, a couple of those. Just throw them in there. raisins. At the little tiny snack box is the best because it's the perfect amount. Okay? And then you have a snack box full of raisins because you can't buy just one, you know. You got to get a bunch of them, so now you got snacks. There we go. Now, the orange. Oh, wait, doesn't fit. Oh, yeah, got to cut it up. So you're going to cut this, the whole thing, into small pieces. And you're just going to mash them through. Now, normally, if you told a brewer that you were putting the whole orange in there, including this pith, this white part, they'd tell you you're crazy. That's where all the bitter oils and everything are at. Like I said, this is that recipe that you almost can't mess up. And it's a great one to start with. Okay. Got that all in there. Now I'm just going to take some more water, some nice filtered water, and I'm just going to top up the jug. Get a little bit more. Okay. You want to leave some room, because once this gets going, it's going to bubble up and it's going to expand a little bit. Okay. So we've got all those yummy ingredients in there. I'm going to give it one last little stir up. Then I'm going to put on what's called an airlock. Okay. So an airlock is this little contraption that will keep air from getting in, because then we'll be making vinegar and it will allow the gas to escape. So as the gas expands, it's going to lift this little piece in the middle and the bubbles will come out the side. Now, if you don't have one of these, all you need is a balloon. Put a balloon over the top of it, poke a very small hole in the balloon, and the balloon over the next day or two is going to inflate. But because of that hole, it won't inflate too much. It will let the gases escape, because we want to let, at this point, we want to let the carbon dioxide leave, and we want to keep just the other byproduct of yeast, which is the alcohol in it. Okay, so this whole process takes about 30 days. So again, let's talk about patience. When you're making a new habit, when you're trying to, let's say you decide you want to be healthier and you want to go out and take that walk every day, you have to give yourself time to build the habit. And a lot of times we don't. After the first couple of days, we're like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. It's hot, it's icky, it's gross. But you have to give yourself that time. Once you have that time and you can get used to the, enjoy doing it, it becomes a habit. But it does take almost 30 days. So this is something that we're going to have to be patient with. We're going to have to give it time to work. We'll look at it every day. Hopefully within 24 to 48 hours, we'll start to see some bubbles in there. And once that happens, we keep an eye on it. So when it stops bubbling, which should happen in probably 1 to 2 weeks, it'll start to clear. It'll become this nice, pretty golden color. And all the things that are floating in it now are going to drop down to the bottom. And that's when we know it's going to be ready to drink. So again, this is one you can't really mess up. That's the only steps there are to this particular mead. So it's something really easy. So when you're talking about transformation and about making changes in yourself, maybe you should always start with something easy, connected to the things you do daily in your life. So, you know, making mead, you have to check it every day. You have to pay attention to it every day. It helps develop a habit. And you can do the same thing with yourself, tied into what you're doing.
With the mead,
Uh-huh.
I think I missed it. When did you put the yeast in?
Oh, you're right. It's sitting right here next to me. Thank you.
That was going to be my question too.
Thank you.
She was making a surprise.
You did a great job. Good job,
What
Viv.
happens if you don't put yeast in there?
Well, it's got the raisins, so
Vinegar.
it does have some natural yeast, and especially with the other things that we put in, there's going to be some natural yeast that occur, some wild yeast. It would take longer, and it might develop a different flavor, but it would still work eventually.
Mm.
So
Can you use distilled water for the mead?
Yes. In fact, that's what I was using.
Okay.
Are you putting the yeast in dry? We can't see
Yep.
what you're doing.
Yep. Sorry. Yeah, I forgot to turn the camera. I apologize. Yep, I just put it in dry.
And how much yeast for the gallon?
Just one packet of
Okay.
that bread yeast.
Like two and a quarter teaspoons?
Yeah. You can actually use even a little less. I use the whole packet because I don't like to leave a packet laying around open.
Yeah.
But I think the official recipe calls for like half of a packet. But like I said, I don't like to leave a packet open. It goes to waste, and I just throw the whole thing in.
Well, then you should make two gallons, so you use the whole packet.
No, if I make 2 gallons, I drink 2 gallons. No. No, what you want to do.
You're gonna have to make a big batch, so I have stuff to share. on
Yes,
the
thank you for
holidays.
the catch there, Broom. I appreciate that.